people who are succeeding at this, where there may be something where we weren't filtering it correctly. And we gained a lot of information that way. That's an example of early detection that you can have on individuals. Some of those individuals that we found, we've never approached. We just identified them internally and then have figured out, oh, these are some of the people who are writing and selling scripts against us. And ultimately, you know, if we need to, we can take action against them. So in the collection of accounts, I mean, everyone knows where they get these. It's all phishing. So we've gotten into, our intelligence group has gotten into the phishing economy and has done things like seeded bad lists. So we'll just hand out lists of users to people and know that anyone that goes to any of these accounts is getting it off the list because they're not real accounts. And then we start gaining information about what they're trying to do and who's using those accounts. We've also just bought lists and wholesale deactivated all the users on the list, telling them they need to change their passwords so that we invalidate the value of the lists. And we've built some systems that pay a lot of attention to the URL formation or people's interactions with the site. And this is actually one of the benefits of us being such a fast-moving company is that stuff changes all the time. The interface points change, the data changes, the cookies change, everything changes a lot. So if someone writes a piece of software, they're either going to have to invest a ton of time keeping up with all the changes we're making in the site and the interfaces in order to make it continue to look as a real user, or they're not going to, which is more typical of what happens. And then we can start identifying information about, oh, this particular URL that's being called is based on the way we used to call it 3 weeks ago. So this is clearly a script, and it happens to be similar coming from all these different places, so it's probably the same script. Let's start attributing that and figuring out who wrote this and why. It's definitely a benefit of the fact that we move so fast that we're able to do this. I think if you had a less dynamic development environment, you might not be able to get quite as much information out of this as we do. But we're actually pretty able to rapidly identify these people. And then, obviously, when they're performing the attack, the automated systems I talked about earlier kick into play and start automatically identifying attacks and actors and potential individuals who are doing it for us. And the users give us a lot of information about the spam. If a bunch of users report particular messages as spam, again, the automated systems will start clearing it out. I'm kind of rushing here because I'm aware of time and I want to make sure we have a QA session, so apologize for that. So at this point after the attack, when we start seeing messages coming down, we'll definitely go after what the target is. If they're going after malware, we'll go get the malware, we'll reverse engineer it, we'll submit it pretty quickly to antivirus people that we work with. We'll look at what it's trying to do to see if it's something that ultimately targets us again or if it goes after another organization. If it does, we'll talk to the other organization and pass that on to them. And if it's affiliate marketing where they're going to redirection sites or other sites, we'll get those taken down within a couple hours. So the time window for having people see the messages and then react on them is actually very, very small because we're already removing messages by the time we're removing the domains that the messages point to. And then finally there's the money. And recently the CAN-SPAM Act was modified so that if people are being affiliate marketers and are directing people back to other marketing sites, that the ultimate marketing site is responsible for the actions of the affiliate. And that's been very helpful for us because if we know ultimately they're selling something, we go to the company that's selling it and say, we have evidence that there's statutory spam that you're marketing. If you don't give us information about who you're giving this money to for these particular accounts, we can hold you liable. And they generally are willing to turn over those people pretty quickly. Which means even after all of that, the investment of the accounts, the software, the attack, the hiding their tracks and everything, ultimately they're not going to get their check, which is pretty destructive to the economics of spam. And when we find them, they're still going to be liable under the CAN-SPAM Act. So you can't actually read these. Here's some information about different suits that we pursued. We've actually got dozens of these types of suits lined up, and we're just pursuing them kind of at our leisure. This was our first big spam lawsuit. I think this still remains the largest CAN-SPAM judgment ever. The statutory damages on this were about $1.3 billion, and the judge thought that was excessive, so he put it down to a much more reasonable number of $870 million. And this is against an individual who's in Canada. And you may think, well, if you have a U.S. judgment against someone in Canada, that's really not that useful for you. But in fact, it is, because it means that any asset that goes through the United States, we have a claim to. So even if we can't actually go after this person's money in Canada, which there are mechanisms which we could, but even if we can't get the money in Canada, it means that no one in the U.S., no affiliate marketer, no business that he can pay can move money through the U.S. without us being able to attach to it. So it makes the cost of doing business in the U.S. much more prohibitive for him. And I don't think he's been spamming since then. And then recently we got a Sanford Wallace judgment, which was smaller. I think it was only about 700 and something million. We had statutory damages in that case of $7 billion, which the judge also felt was a bit excessive. And he reduced it as much as he could, and where we had multiple counts, he only counted one, and he still ended up with a much more reasonable number of $700 million. In that case also, though, which is interesting, is because the CAN-SPAM Act has both civil and criminal penalties, the judge ordered Mr. Wallace not to interact with Facebook during the trial and to cease any spamming activity as defined by the CAN-SPAM Act, which he didn't do. So there's a pending criminal case against him now because of that, which would be interesting how that comes out. Okay, so see how we're doing on time. Not well, but we'll still run through. So what types of things did I just say? We've got the pyramid again of vulnerabilities and threats and attacks and actors. Your highest leverage actions in these points is to go after the actors, in our belief. The vulnerabilities and threats. Vulnerabilities are endless. The threats you keep an eye on because they're important, but don't get mired in them, and really pay most of your attention to the attacks, because that's where you can gather intelligence about. Get your foot in the door as to the whole chain of people attacking you, and then eventually identify the actors and hound them, keep after them, and destroy their economics. But really, I think this slide says it all as to what I think we do and things that may help you, is gather lots and lots of intelligence, disrupt people when they're attacking you, use your laws wherever you can, and be innovative about using them, and don't rely necessarily on law enforcement to take care of all these things for you. Stay out of a compliance mindset, because policies and compliance, while helpful, are not going to help you really defend against the bad guys who you identify and go after or hound them as much as you can, because that's the highest leverage action that you can take against attacks. And ultimately remember that your interests and your users' interests should be aligned, and they are aligned in terms of your security apparatus protecting them. Then finally, after all these axioms, here's one that's really important. Sometimes just do what you have to do and forget the rules, forget the compliance, because the other side doesn't have to comply with anything. They can do whatever they want. And sometimes you're going to have to too. Okay, let's take questions now. Is there any questions? Anything? Yes. One way in the back. Well,